Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin daf samach dalet. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran Zoom family. We extend a heartfelt mazal tov to our fellow learner Eric Summer on the marriage of his daughter Ariel to Nitai. And the merit of their wedding, the words of the pasuk should be realized quickly. Meir Hashem Elokeinu yishama ba'arei Yehuda v'chutzot Yerushalayim kol sason v'kol simcha. Today's daf is sponsored by Rabbi Lisa Malik in memory of the 7th month anniversary of the death of 12-year-old Aryeh Kluger Zichrono Lebracha, and the second yahrzeit of 27-year-old Jonathan Loeb on Rosh Chodesh Mar Cheshvan, and in memory of all the children and adults who were mercilessly murdered on Simchat Torah. May their memories be for a blessing. Today's daf is sponsored by Rachel Savin in honor of her son Itai, who is coming to Israel on Aliyah today. We are so proud of you. And continue prayers for safety in our country and safety of everyone, our soldiers, our residents in the north and the south, and of the entire country and around the world. Okay, we are going to get started with the end of our sugya that we started yesterday. We had a whole debate about whether, and we're going to continue this issue of ne'emanut, what we say, in terms of if we don't have testimony otherwise, do we believe people to say various things? So yesterday, what we had is a man said, I betrothed my daughter. And the question became, can she then, if she has relations with another man while she's betrothed according to the testimony of the father, can she also get punished by stoning? Okay, this was our question. The second question we asked after we dealt with the case in the Mishna: can she get stoned based on the father's testimony? So Rav said no, and Rav Asi said yes. Okay, the fathers even believed to the extent that we can give her the punishment of stoning. Then we ended with Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said, Echad ze v'echad ze ein soklim. Okay, here we're talking about not only his testimony, but her own testimony. She says, I was betrothed, and then was caught with some other man. So according to Rav Chisda, whether the father said it or she said it about herself, which we talked about with Shavi and Nafsha Chaticha di Yisura, she basically created an Isra upon herself, but she doesn't get stoned for that. Okay, neither would she get stoned based on the father's testimony. And now they say, Rav Chisda L'Tameh, we're 6 lines from the bottom of Samach Gimel Amud Bet. Rav Chisda is consistent within his opinion. Why? To Amar Rav Chisda, Beniza ben Tesha Shani v'yom echad, Biti zo bat shalosh shani v'yom echad, ne'eman lekorban avalo l'makov v'lo l'onashi. Let's say you have a situation where a man engages in relations with his minor daughter, or a mother with her minor son. Okay? Now, the minor will not get punished, but the question is, will the father or mother get punished for having an araya relationship? Can they get killed with their child? Now, it all depends on, according to this, if the child is of age. Okay, if the child is, by the way, this isn't just the parent, it could be any erba, any forbidden relationship, a brother with his sister, okay, something like that. Now, already we've discussed this many times, even though it's hard to fathom, but the rabbis determined the age for sexual relations being considered sexual relations is if the girl is over 3 and if the boy is over 9. Now, again, I want to be very clear. The 9-year-old boy, or the 9 in a day, or the 3-year-old girl, 3 in a day, or 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it is, anything above 3, they're not going to get punished for this araya relationship because they're not old enough to get punished. You have to be of the age of mitzvot to get punished by the death penalty. But the question is, does the adult who had the forbidden relationship with them, the relative, did they get punished? So the question is, what if nowadays generally we have birth certificates, right? We know exactly when people are born, although there are some people, whether it was because of the Holocaust or something like that, who don't actually have their birth certificate. And there's some people I know who we're not even sure how old they really are, okay? So let's say we have a situation like that where someone doesn't have proof when they were born. And all we have is what the father says, okay? So somebody says, and engaged in a relationship with some forbidden relative, and they were of age according to the father's testimony. If it was shkaga, let's say they didn't know that it was forbidden, or they didn't know this was the relative, or whatever it was, and the relationship was a forbidden relationship that was an accident or unwitting somehow. So then the father is believed that the child is of age in order to require whoever it was who slept with that child to bring a sacrifice. but not for malkot and not for onashim, not for any punishment. No one's going to get punished based on the father's testimony. And that matches what we just said. She's not going to get skila based on the father's testimony. Again, the testimony is different. One is she betrothed, and the other is the child of age. But either which way, it's the father's testimony that we're not going to allow it for punishment. And Tanya Kavateta Rav Chisda, there's a braita that supports his reading. And this is, again, a different issue, but they're all the same kind of thing. My son's 13 in a day, my daughter's 12 in a day. If the child made a vow or a cher and promised something to the temple, which usually those things go to the kohen, lehekdesh to the temple, le'erchin, so they promise the value of a person. That promise is only a valid promise if the child is 12 or 13. To say that this neder is a valid vow, or the cherem, or the hekdesh, or all that is valid, we believe the father's testimony to say my child was of age. But lo lamakotu lo nashim. If the father said the child reached the age of mitzvot and they had done something wrong and they're supposed to get a punishment for it, we don't believe the father unless we have proof that the child is really of age. Okay, so again, we see Rav Chisda consistent with his own opinion and fits in with the braita. Okay, again, these are all three different cases, but they all work together with the same idea. And when it comes to punishments, we're not going to punish based on a father's testimony alone. Again, if it's kind of, at a certain point, it becomes clear the child's of age. But here we're talking about where it's not clear, did they reach the age of mitzvot or not? Kidashti, okay, new Mishnah. Kidashti epiti, kidashti v'gerashti kashi ktana, v'harehi ktana ne'ema. We're going to have three cases in the Mishnah. The first one he's believed. The second two, the father's not going to be believed. Again, all about believability. The next one, we're going to get to the husband. His believability when it comes to obligations of yibum and chalitza. So this Mishnah says, the father comes forward. We don't know that this woman's betrothed, but the father says this woman's betrothed. Okay, my daughter. I betrothed my daughter, or I betrothed her, but also accepted a divorce on her behalf. Okay, so either one would prove either she's not a free woman or she is a free woman and can marry anyone. Now, he claims this all happened when she was a minor. Now, he can do that, right? He can accept Kiddushin on her behalf, and he can also accept a get on her behalf. And it would have to be that right now, when he's testifying about her, she is right now a minor. Harehi ktana ne'eman. He'll be believed. So a father is believed to say he betrothed the daughter, or took betrothal on her behalf, or did a betrothal and a divorce accepted on her behalf, if he claims it all happened when she was a minor and she's still a minor. But if he says I betrothed her or betrothed her and accepted a divorce on her behalf when she was a minor, but right now she's not a minor anymore, Eino ne'eman, he's not believed. Nishbeit upditia. This is unfortunately a very relevant circumstance now this week, which is if she was taken into captivity and I redeemed her. Now, what's the concern of captivity? And if you didn't believe this until now, unfortunately, we saw this with our own eyes this week. But people taken into captivity are often raped. And if a woman is raped, she's not allowed to be married to a kohen. So if the father testifies she was taken into captivity and redeemed, which normally would forbid her to a kohen, he does not have the power in his words here to forbid her to a kohen. Again, all these cases are talking about where we have no other reason to believe she's betrothed, not betrothed, taken into captivity. It's only the father's testimony alone. So basically we have the father can testify about her marital status, either which way she is married or she was married and divorced, right? Which again, divorce would mean she can't marry a kohen. And as long as he said it happened when she was a minor and she's still a minor. But even if he said it happened when she was a minor, but now she's older, he's not believed. And when it comes to the captivity, she's also not believed. He's also not believed. So that means she can go marry a kohen and we don't have to take any heed to what he said. And in the middle case, we can assume she's not betrothed at all, so she can go marry anybody she wants. Mishna reisha, Mishna sefer. So the big question is, what's the difference between case 1 versus case 2 and 3? To which they answer, reisha biyade, sefer la biyade. Since it's in his power to betroth her right now, okay, or to betroth her and accept a divorce on her behalf, because he's the father and she's a minor, since he can do it all for her, therefore he's believed. Okay, this we've seen many times, and there's going to be a big problem with this. There's going to be 2 problems with this, but eventually we're going to reject this. But let's just get the concept, right? Because you can do something yourself, you're believed to say it's done because theoretically you could just do it on your own. So since you could just do it on your own, the problem here obviously is what? You can't just always accept a betrothal. There's someone else on the other side. What if the guy doesn't want to betroth her? What about betrothal and divorce? Well, he really can't do the divorce because the divorce has to be affected by the husband. But we'll put that aside. We'll only get back to that question later. But theoretically, since she's a minor and he's still he's in control of her, right? Whereas he can't betroth her when she's already older. So that explains case number 2. And he can't take her into captivity and rape her, right? That's not like in his ability to do. And the Gemara is even going to say what it really means is he can't forbid her to a kohen in general. The father doesn't have the power to do something that's going to forbid her to a kohen. And that's going to raise a huge problem because we're actually going to say he maybe could. And we're going to keep saying, well, not in this way, but maybe this way, not in this way, maybe this way. And we're going to try to eventually find a case where theoretically the father could do something that would forbid her to a kohen, in which case, nishbeit v'nifdeit really only means you can't marry a kohen. So since he could do it in some other way, we're going to actually prove that it is biyado. Okay, but that's going to take us a while till we get through that whole long section. So right now, let's just assume simply he can have the control of betrothal and divorce. He's in charge of all that when she's a minor. That explains case number 1, and that's why she's believed. The other case is not in his control, and therefore he's not believed. Vilo, is that really not true? Now we're going to really focus on this last one. The fact that he says she was taken into captivity and redeemed really just means she can't marry a kohen. If he really wanted, right, again, go back to Romeo and Juliet. Let's say she was in love with the kohen, and all he wanted to do, and he didn't like this guy, all he wanted to do was forbid her to that. Well, he didn't have to say nishbeit v'nifdeit. He could have done it some other way, which actually would then mean he's believed. In other words, again, if it's biyado, we assume he's believed, because since he could do it himself, why would he lie and say it's done when he could actually just do it? So, right, this goes back to Sukkot we've learned before about how we can assume someone's telling the truth, right? If they could just do it themselves and make, right, then we assume when they say that it's done, that it was done. So now we say, if he marries her off to a halal, which theoretically is in his control, he can find a halal, arrange a marriage. And if she marries a halal, which is a child born to a kohen and a divorcee, let's say, or some sort of forbidden relationship for a kohen, he would then, now we learned this before, that a woman who has relations or marries X number of people, okay, which is going to be a big question, like which people is this? So let's assume right now a halal, that now forbids her from marrying a kohen. So since he could betroth her to a halal, that would then forbid her from marrying a kohen, to which they say, and then therefore it's biyado, and then it's no different than the first case, he should be believed. Halo kashya, ki Rabbi Dostai ben Yehuda. So they say that's not difficult because you could say, like the Mishna holds like Rabbi Dostai ben Yehuda, who said, Damar b'not Yisrael mikveh tahara l'chalalim. All the women of Israel can purify chalalim. What does that mean? Well, let's go with halalot first, okay? We have a man a kohen who marries someone he's not allowed to marry. The child, let's say they have a daughter, she's a halala. Now, if you remember, the Torah says a kohen can't marry a halala. So this halala, throughout the generations, if she keeps having girls, every subsequent generation is going to be a problem because that halala marries a kohen, right? And they can't, right? It's going to keep going down if they keep marrying kohanim, right? That's a problem. But if you have a halal, if a son is born, it ends there. So if the halal marries a woman, anyone, a bat kohen, the daughter of a kohen, daughter of a Levi, daughter of an Israelite, it doesn't matter. The son or daughter will not be a halal anymore. It's the end game. So that means, now here you have to make this jump. If the son born to this relationship will not be a halal, that means, and she's a mikveh tahara, she purifies halal, right? She ends this halal curse. That means that she herself, if, let's say he dies, she can go marry a kohen. There's no problem. In other words, if she has some relationship that's problematic, then she's no longer permitted to marry a kohen. But if she's with a halal that doesn't, if her sons aren't going to be halalim, then that won't preclude her from being able to marry a kohen. So that means if the father, it's not biyado to mess her up for the kahuna, because if he marries her to a halal, she's actually not, according to Rabbi Dostai, she's not forbidden to marry a kohen. So it's not in his power to basically ruin her to kohanim. So then they say, okay, well, hare biyado lahasiya lamamzer. Now the father can marry her off to a mamzer if she marries a mamzer. Now you have to understand, even if she doesn't marry a mamzer, but she has relations with a mamzer, she's forbidden to a kohen. Okay. So but in terms of the father's power, this is something important to understand this sugya. In the terms of the father's power, the father doesn't have power to encourage his daughter to have relations out of marriage with a mamzer. Okay, it's not part of the things the father has control of, or he's allowed to do by Torah law, within the realm. But what can he do? He can betroth her, and he can betroth her to anyone. Now, of course, it's forbidden to betroth her to a mamzer, but it doesn't matter because the father has power to betroth her, so the father can betroth her to anyone. So that means if the father really wanted to mess her up for kuna, he could betroth her to a mamzer. Now, this is only going to be true if there's actually Kiddushin with a mamzer. If there's no Kiddushin, then obviously, remember, like if the father can betroth her to, let's say, her brother, okay, which would be forbidden, right? What do we say? That's chayav kritut. You'll get karet for that. And then there's no Kiddushin. So if there's no Kiddushin and Kiddushin tofsin, there's no Kiddushin, well, then obviously you can't do it because all his power is in Kiddushin. It would have to be a case where there's Kiddushin. But what do we learn? Kiddushin doesn't work if it's kritut. But if it's a lav, like don't marry a mamzer, right? You're not allowed to do that. But if you do it, there's actually a valid marriage. So theoretically, the father could theoretically betroth her to a mamzer. Not that he wanted to do that, but if he really wanted to mess up his daughter for marrying a kohen, he could have betrothed her to a mamzer where the betrothal would be effective. Again, you're not allowed to do it, but the betrothal would be effective. So there you have a case where he could have done it. And then the Mishna doesn't make any sense. Why isn't he believed then? He could have betrothed her to a mamzer and messed her up for marrying a kohen. To which the Gemara answers, the Mishna must go according to Rabbi Akiva. We remember Rabbi Akiva's famous shita about mamzerim. Damar ein kiddushin tofsim b'chai ve'lavim. Rabbi Akiva says, not only chai ve'kritut, brother, sister, father, daughter, things like that. Even mamzerim, there is no betrothal. And that's why it's not in the power of the father to mess her up for kuna, because he would have to betroth her to a mamzer and there's no such thing. And again, once you get out of the realm of betrothal, well, then the father has no power anymore. The father's power is given to him to betroth the daughter. When there's no betrothal, there's nothing he could do. And that would explain, again, back to our question, why are we saying that the father is not believed in the Mishnah? So the reason is because the father has no power here to do it. Since he can't do it himself, that's why he's not believed. Okay, but they're still really not happy with this because well, according to Rabbi Simai, and we're going to read it inside, even though Rabbi Akiva says there's no Kiddushin in Chai Ve'Lavim, he has some exceptions to the rule. What are those? Even though he uses the Almanah Kohen Gadol example, it's because it's learned from the Psukim there, but any kahuna, okay? Kohen Grusha, Kohen Divorcee, Kohen Chalala, Kohen Gadol and widow, all those relationships, even though you can't do it, if you do it, the marriage will be valid. So even though he said all Chai Ve'Lavim, he meant like Mamzer, Nitin, all those guys, but not the Kohen issues. So now, if the father then theoretically could betroth the woman, his daughter, to one of these forbidden relations with a Kohen, assuming she was in that category, right? It would have to be that she was one of these women that were forbidden to a Kohen. But you could have a case where the father could mess her up for the kahuna. Rabbi Simai Omer, Mina kol aser Rabbi Akiva mamzer, chutz me'almanah lekohen gadol, sharei amra Torah lo yikach v'lo yechalel. Chilulim oseh ve'ein oseh mamzerim. You would really have to say the almanah lekohen gadol would be the case in the Mishnah, because if she was already divorced, then already she could marry Kohen. He wouldn't be adding anything. But if she was a widow, let's say, and she can't marry Kohen Gadol, so we could betroth her to a Kohen Gadol. Again, we're getting into ridiculous cases here because, you would have to figure out how to betroth her to the Kohen Gadol. There's only one. But again, they're trying to say theoretically there's a way the father could mess her up for kahuna. Again, what would he do? He would betroth her to a Kohen Gadol. She then would be forbidden to a kahuna. Since that's theoretically possible, that's really what you have to say. It's biyad ha'av. It's the father's hands. He could do it. And if he could do it, then basically, why isn't he believed to say she was taken in captivity and now can't marry a kohen? Now, how do we know that this is an exception according to Rabbi Akiva? Why does Rabbi Simai think that? Because the Torah says, lo yikach lo yichalel. Don't marry this woman. And if you do, you will cause your child to be a halal. But notice it says halal. It doesn't say mamzer. So chilulim oseh ve'ein osim mamzerim, meaning like the mamzerim issue here means basically, right, he made all these kids mamzerim. That means in Kiddushin tofsim, basically. It's all synonymous. So that means that you could actually do a betrothal there. So they answer, so what do they say? Well, you'd have to say the Mishnah is like Rabbi Yeshvav and not like Rabbi Simai. Well, who's Rabbi Yeshvav? Yeshevav, Da'amal, Bovin Tzaveach Alakiva ben Yosef, Shaya Omil, Kol She'ein Lo B'Yav Yisrael Avav Mamzer. There were different explanations of Rabbi Akiva. He says the Mishnah, who again assumes the father's not believed because it's not in the power of the father. Why is it not in the power of the father? Because according to Rabbi Yeshav, and then you would have to say the Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Yeshav's exempt. Now, Rabbi Yeshav didn't like Rabbi Akiva's opinion, but he understood Rabbi Akiva in a different way than Rabbi Simai did. He said Rabbi Akiva said any single forbidden relationship, okay? Anything. If there isn't an opportunity to do bi'ah, because bi'ah is forbidden, the child's a mamzer, which means, again, there's no kiddushin, which means there is no way the father could betroth this woman to anybody who would disqualify her from kuna. If she went herself and did it, she could. But, right, she could have a relationship with any of these men, a sexual relationship, and that would forbid her. But the father, we want to find a case where the father has the power to do it, because anytime the father would betroth her to anyone who's a forbidden relationship, okay, now there's all categories of forbidden. There's karet, there's chayve mito beit din, right, where the court instilled punishment. There's lavim, lotases, which we just talked about. There's two different categories, like the mamzer and netin, and then there's all the kohanim who can't do it. Then there's chayve ase, which is ger mitzri, ger edomi, okay, an Egyptian or an Edomite convert. Only the third generation is allowed to come in. Now that's a positive, I mean, from where you learn negative, like our Tanai of B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven, right? Whether you can learn Michlal Lavatash Me'ahen. Now there, it never says you can't do it, but it's obvious you can't do it because you can only marry the third generation. So it means first and second generations are forbidden. That's already a lower level because that's what we call chayve ase. It means it comes from a positive, you learn the negative. So now, according to Rabbi Yeshav, any of these, any time where you can't have bi'ah for whatever reason, whether it's chayve lavim, whether it's chayve kritu, chayve mito beit din, or even chayve ase, right? Then the vlad is a mamzer, which means there's no kiddushin, which means there's no way the father could ever disqualify her from marrying a kohen. Well, it really depends how you understand Rabbi Yeshav. If Rabbi Yeshav is coming independent of Rabbi Simai and just saying, I understand Rabbi Akiva, that he's saying this is across the board everything, then it would make sense that really, and then we would say, the father is not believed because it's really not biyado. There's no way he could ever betroth. But we're still going to end with a question here. But if he's just responding to Rabbi Simai said, Rabbi Akiva includes chayve lavim, right? There's no kiddushin, and the kid's a mamzer if you have a relationship like that. But excludes isurei kehuna. Comes Rabbi Yeshav and says, no, I disagree with you. Rabbi Akiva went farther than you think. Well, farther is going to be one step farther and not two steps farther, which means farther is going to include isurei kehuna, all the lotases. But what's it not going to include? The chayve ase. And then, which would be the Edomi and the Mitzri, the Egyptian and the Edomite convert. And that would be a case where the father could betroth her to one of those. And then even Rabbi Yeshav would think, it depends how you understand Rabbi Yeshav. As again, this means if he's talking in a vacuum, not connected at all with what anybody else said, then we assume he means everything, including the Mitzri and Edomi, and then there is no, and that would resolve our issue with the Mishnah. But if he was responding to Rabbi Simai, then we assume that he's only going one step farther and not two steps farther. And then he would still be able to have a case in the Mishnah that would make sense, and as the father still has it in his power, and then the father should be believed because he could theoretically betroth her to a Mitzri and an Edomi, which would, again, it would mean she can't marry a Kohen anymore, but it would actually be a valid Kiddushin, and therefore the father could do it. So that was a very long way to get to whether you hold like this one or this one or this one or this one. There are cases to be found where the father could do it. And if the father could do it, then it's in his power, and then that can't be the difference between the first and the second and third cases. And furthermore, and this is what I mentioned before, we have another problem with saying it's biyado. First, we were challenging with, what do you mean case number 3 is not biyado? It is biyado somehow, right? That's what we did right now. Now we're going to say, who's to assume case 1 is biyado? How do you know he's in control of that? Amar Avashi, and that's what I said in the very beginning. You want to say the first case where he says she's betrothed, or she's betrothed and divorced, is in his power? Number 1, need to be adola kacha, be adola garsha. Maybe you could say, okay, he can accept kiddushin on her behalf, and he can accept the get, but he he can initiate Kiddushin, maybe, but can't initiate Kiddushin that the husband has to do. It's like the mouse in the hole, right? Without the other side agreeing, he actually can't betroth the woman. He has to have agreement by the other guy. If the guy doesn't want to betroth her, then so it's not really in his control. So we reject that whole first explanation. So we reject it on basically 3 counts, okay? 2 major ones, and then within the second, right, within the number 1, this last case is not really not biyado, it really is. And the first case is really biyado. I'm sorry, is not really biyado, because it's not him, right, who gets to decide if she's betrothed or if she's divorced. So Ela Amar Rav Ashi gives a whole different explanation. Why is it that when it comes to saying she's married or married and divorced, the father's believed, as long as she's a minor, but not if she's older, and not about disqualifying her for kahuna? What's the reason? And that she was taken into captivity. So Ela Amar Rav Ashi Reisha Rachmanahem Kirafuna. The Torah gave him rights to be believed. And we learned this already yesterday. As Rav Huna says, how do we know that the father has rights to say my daughter is betrothed? Because that's exactly what he says in the Motzi Shemar case. Right? The guy who claims the wife lost her virginity before he married her, right? Wasn't a virgin when he married her, even though he was promised she was. In that context of that discussion, the father comes and he says to the court, I gave my daughter to this man. That shows that he has power to claim in court, I gave my daughter to this man, and be believed. It's not exactly the simple reading there, but it's a drasha, not pasuk. Leish asara hazehi tira. To this man, that means to him and no one else, and that forbids her to every other man in the world. And hazeh, to this, the word this comes to say, but she's permitted to this man. So he's allowed to basically say, you're betrothed to X, okay, to this person. And in that one statement, he permits her to that person and forbids her to everyone else in the world. And therefore, B'nisuin, which includes then Gerushin also, and in issues of marriage and divorce, the Torah gave special power to the father to be believed. And that's why it's what we call Gzerat Katuv. It says so in the Torah. And then you can't really argue against it. But B'shvuya, but when it comes to saying she was taken into captivity, which would then preclude her from being able to marry a kohen, lo hemne. There's no pasuk anywhere that says anything about that. So he's not believed about that. Okay, that was all about the fathers. So that was a much simpler answer that we just started there. We would have had a much less complicated sugya. But because we started with the more obvious answer, which is things in one's control, you're believed. When they're not in your control, you're not believed. The problem is it didn't really fit with the different lines in the Mishna. New case. Now we have yibum. A woman is married to a man. The man dies. They have no children. Okay, which also, unfortunately, very relevant for this past week. Now, what if he claims, okay, we don't know he has brothers, or he doesn't have brothers. So now, Misha Amar B'Shami Tato Yesh Li Banim. Let's say, we don't know he has any sons. Okay, couple gets married. We don't know of any past of this guy. He claims, as he's about to die, by the way, you don't have to do yibum, because I didn't tell you this, but I was married before and I had kids from some other woman. Now remember, it's all about the husband, not about the wife. It's not about their particular relationship. If he had children from some other marriage, there's no mitzvah of yibum. And then she could be permitted to marry anyone she wants without having to do yibum or chalitza. Naaman, he's believed. If he says yesh li achim, now let's say they get married, he has no brothers. Now, if there's no brothers, there's no obligation to do yibum. You have to have brothers to do yibum. It's another way you get out of yibum. So if there's no brothers, and then if he claims, though, okay, they don't know there's brothers, and then he comes and says, oh, by the way, I have some long lost brother living somewhere, who knows where, and by the way, you're going to have to do yibum, which, by the way, is a huge problem, because if she doesn't even know who the brother is, she's going to be stuck for the rest of her life. So Eino Ne'eman, he's not believed. Okay, we don't believe him while he's sitting on his deathbed, and he says, just so you should know, I have a brother. Okay, and then she can go marry anyone she wants. So now, again, we have the beginning, he's believed. The second case, he's not believed. So Alma, from here you can infer, the Gemara says, Ne'eman latir ve'ein ne'eman le'asor. Basically, we permit him, we believe him to permit the wife to go marry anyone she wants, but we don't permit him, we don't accept his word, we don't believe him to forbid her. In which case, Nema manitin to look at Rabbi Natan. Well, then our Mishnah would seem to not match Rabbi Natan's opinion. Now we're going to bring a braita where there's a machloka between Rebbe and Rabbi Natan about a different case. We're going to assume that it's the same idea. And we're going to see that Rabbi Natan actually permits the husband to be believed to forbid his wife. But the case is going to be a little different, and Rava and Abaye are each going to explain in different ways why the case of Rabbi Natan wouldn't be true in our case, and Rabbi Natan would even agree with our Mishnah that in this case where he just claims at his death, I have brothers, we're not going to believe. So let's see. So so again, first we're going to assume it's the same thing, then the Gemara, we're going to bring two explanations why it's not, and why Rabbi Natan would really agree with our Mishnah. Ditan, B'shat Kiddushin Amar, Yesh Rabbanit. So when they got betrothed, he said, I have sons. Okay, maybe as a way to say, you can marry me because you don't have to worry if I die without children, you'll have to do yibum. But bishat mita, but when he's about to die, amal ein lo banim. He says, by the way, I lied to you when we got married. Bishat kiddushin amar ein lo achim. Same idea, by the way. It's just one was about the sons, one was about the brothers. But if at the time kiddushin, he says, listen, I have no brothers, so don't worry, you won't have to do yibum. And then bishat mita, when he's dying, he says, yesh li achim. He says, by the way, I didn't tell you, but I have this brother. And you're going to have to do yibum. Ne'eman lahatir ve'ein ne'eman la'asur, to Rabbi. Rabbi says we only believe the husband to permit things, just like our Mishnah, and we don't believe the husband on his deathbed right now when he says, I have brothers or I have no children. Rabbi Natan, so we basically believe the first thing he said. Rabbi Natan omer af ne'eman la'asur. Rabbi Natan says, no, we even believe him to forbid her, which sounds like he disagrees with our Mishnah. So that's why the Gemara said, it seems like our Mishnah doesn't agree with Rabbi Natan. Amar Rav. So Rava, like I said, Rava and Abaye are both going to say, no. Rabbi Natan would agree with our Mishnah as well, and that case was different. Shane Hatam, that case was different. Why? Kevan di bishat mitaka hadrabe ema kushtakama. Because, now, this is both he was on his deathbed. So it's not because he's on his deathbed we believe him, but in that case, he basically, if we believe him on his deathbed, it means he's lying and he's correcting his lie. Now, it's very common that someone on their deathbed, if they had done something wrong in their life, they might want to correct it at their last moments. So because he said at the beginning, I have sons, and he really doesn't, he wants to say, I just want to clear things up. I actually lied and I'm really sorry, but I happen not to have sons and you have to do yibum. And then we're going to believe him because on his deathbed, he wants to fix the mistakes he made. So therefore, since he contradicts something he said earlier, we're actually going to believe him on his deathbed. In our Mishnah, there were no two contradictory statements. It was just on his deathbed. He made the statement. Well, even Rabbi Natan would agree in that case. He wouldn't be believed. To which Abaye says that makes no sense. Amarle Abaye says to Rava, what kind of distinction are you making? B'lav kol sheken, wouldn't it be the opposite? Wouldn't it be an obvious that Rabbi Natan would obviously say it in our Mishnah? Why? Hashtu mahatam de kamari le dibure amar kushta kamar. There where he weakened his claim, he contradicted himself. And we're going to believe him, even though, there's contradictory statements, all the more so. In our Mishnah, all he said was one statement. So when he contradicts himself, we're going to believe him all the more so. When he doesn't contradict himself, he should be believed. So I don't agree with you, but Abaye is still going to say that Rabbi Natan wouldn't agree with our Mishnah, but to say that, what he has to say is the Mishnah and the braita are talking about two different situations. Amar Abaye, matnitin de lo muchsak lam ba'achei, v'lo muchsak lam b'bnei. Our Mishnah is talking about where there's no chazak of anything. We don't know he has kids. We don't know he has brothers. We don't know anything. As far as we're concerned, he has no kids. He has no brothers. Damrinan, and then we say, Kevan de lo muchsak lam b'bnei v'lo ba'achei, amar yesh lo banim ne'eman, yesh lo achim eino ne'eman. Therefore, we're going to say, if he says, I have sons, and you don't have to do yibum, we'll believe him. If he says you have brothers, he's not believed. Why? Lav kol k'mine da'asher la kol yama. When it's his word alone, and there's no chazaka, we don't know he has. If he starts to say I have brothers when we don't know he has any brothers, we can't give someone the power to forbid their wife based on just their word alone. That's not, you need witnesses for that. We're not going to allow it. So we will allow it if we don't know he has sons. If he says he has sons, we will believe him to permit this woman, but to forbid her, no, we're not going to believe him. And that even Rabbi Natan will agree. But the braita, turning out I'm a bet, the braita is talking about a different situation. Now here and now it's going to be a little complicated. There's going to be stage 1, 2, and 3. Stage 1 is before the betrothal, what people thought. Okay, now there's no witnesses. Rashi makes this clear. There's no witnesses to anything. All we have is what people thought, what he said, and then what he said the second time at his deathbed. So muchsak lam, before the wedding, people assumed he had brothers, v'lo muchsak lam b'bnei. Basically, the assumption, the known assumption was, if this woman marries this man and he's to die without kids, there's going to be a chiyuv yibum because he has brothers, he doesn't have sons. Now, It wasn't proof. It wasn't clear. We didn't see his brothers. And, we obviously didn't see sons. That's why we assume he didn't have any sons. And then when he comes along and says, I have no brothers, or I have sons, to basically say, you're not chayav in yibum. Well, the amrinan mali l'shakir. When there's a chazaka that says, we assume you'll be chayav in yibum, this woman, and then comes the husband and says, you're not going to be chayav in yibum, he's believed. Why is he believed? Now, if he says you're not chayav in yibum because you're not going to be chayavet, you're not going to be liable for yibum because either I have no brothers or I have sons from another marriage, we're going to believe that statement. This is called a mali l'shakir. It's like amigo. It's saying, for what reason would he lie? It's something, if he basically, all he wants to say is, don't think like everybody does that you're going to be obligated in yibum. You're not. Well, he has a better way to do that instead of lying. He could just, my kamar, what's he trying to do? To exempt her from yibum and say, don't worry, you don't have to do yibum? He could just give her a get. Remember, we learned that you could give a get and say, this will be your get if I die, right? This will be your get from today if I die. So if he wants to basically go into marriage and say to the wife, listen, you don't ever have to worry about yibum because I have no brothers or because I have a child from a previous marriage, he doesn't need to lie to do that. If let's say he didn't have sons and he had brothers, he could have done it in another way. He could have just given her a get unconditioned upon him dying. So therefore, there's no reason for him to lie. So therefore, he must be telling the truth. Okay, that's the assumption. Now, that's stage one. So stage one is, there's a chazaka. We think she would be chayav in yibum. He claims not. We're going to believe him because what motivation does he have to lie? That's what it means, mali l'shakir. What motivation does he have to lie? He can resolve it easily. It's kind of like the biyado that we started with today. It's in his control to make it happen. So he doesn't need to lie to make it happen by falsity, right? He could just make it happen in reality. But the question is, how now the machloket between Rebbe and Rabbi Natan, and again, this would then have nothing to do with our Mishna, because our Mishna was there was no chazaka to begin with, but that she would be chayav in yibum. And that's why Rabbi Natan would agree that he doesn't have the power to forbid her. But in this case, there was a chazaka to begin with. So there's chazaka, and now there's mali l'shakir. The question is, what happens when you have a mali l'shakir that goes against the chazaka? The chazaka says she's chayav in yibum. The mali l'shakir, he didn't need to lie, so he must be believed. How strong is that against a chazaka? So that's the machloket Rebbe and Rabbi Natan. Rebbe savar mali l'shakir ki edim dami. It's as if witnesses came. That's how strong a mali l'shakir is. It's so clear he's telling the truth that it's as if two witnesses appeared and told us this. Now, atu edim akre chazaka. So the edim come and they uproot the chazaka entirely. It's as if they wipe out whatever the people thought beforehand. Now, if he comes later, right, and then claims that I was lying, but it's his word against witnesses, because his mali l'shakir is so strong, it's like witnesses, that it wipes out the original chazaka, and we're not going to believe him when he dies. But Rabbi Natan safar mali l'shakir ki chazaka dami below ate chazaka va'akar chazaka legamri. Rabbi Natan says no, a mali l'shakir only has the same. It's the same as a chazaka. So we had a chazaka, we had a mali l'shakir. The mali l'shakir kind of pushes the chazaka out of the way, but the chazaka is still there. So if something becomes clear later, like he claims I lied in the beginning, then that reinstates the chazaka because it's still there, it wasn't erased, and therefore the mali l'shakir kind of becomes unimportant at this point. So it's all a matter of how strong a mali l'shakir is, and that would explain whether we believe him or not. But again, that shows, so there were two explanations, Rava and Abaye, as to why Rabbi Natan would actually agree with our Mishnah, and the case that Rabbi Natan brought was different than the one we're talking about here. Next case. This is actually going to be a little simpler because we already did this, and most of this sugya is review. There's a little bit extra that we haven't learned yet, but it's something we learned not very long ago. The Mishnah says, someone who betroths his daughter without saying which daughter, ein habagrot bichlal. It doesn't include any of the daughters who are beyond the age that he could betroth them, because he obviously only betrothed the younger daughters. Right? Later we'll say this is so obvious why they need to say it. Second case, he has two groups of daughters from two different wives. He married one wife, had daughter 1, daughter 2. Then he married another wife, had daughter 3 and 4. So 3 and 4 are younger than 1 and 2. And he says, he says, I betrothed my oldest daughter, or my older daughter, right? My daughter who is old. or who is older. Now we don't know, but he said, I don't know. Well, that's a very confusing way to say, right? It could be the oldest. It could be the older one, the younger one of the first wife, which is still older than the other two, or even the older one of the second wife, because she's older than the youngest. So, because this is basically saying older is all relative. But, right, so therefore, kulan asurot, all of them are forbidden because they all might be potentially betrothed, chutz min haktana shebiktanot divrei Rabbi Meir, other than the very youngest, because she's clearly not older. That's divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi says, what are you talking about? Kulan mutarot chutz min hagdolah shebigdolot. Only the oldest is the one who's forbidden, because when he says oldest, he obviously meant oldest, really. And this we learned already. We'll see it inside. This is a machloket about, does someone leave open room for doubt in their words? Do we assume? Rabbi Yossi says a person wouldn't say something that's ambiguous, and therefore he obviously, if he said old or older or oldest, he obviously meant oldest. But if he said, according to Rabbi Meir, people say ambiguous things all the time, and people might say something that's going to leave it open, and therefore we're going to forbid all three. Because again, what does it mean forbid them? It means no one can get married until they get a get from him, because perhaps they're betrothed to him. Now we're going to do the exact same thing, but with the younger one. Okay, he's going to say, I betrothed my young daughter. Same thing, right? It could mean the youngest of all of them. It could mean the youngest, right? The oldest daughter of the second wife, because she's younger than the other two. It could mean the younger one of the first wife. It obviously doesn't mean the oldest of all of them, right? So therefore, kulam asurot chutz min hagdolah shebigdolot. So all are forbidden except for the oldest of the oldest, right? Of the oldest wife. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi omer kulam mutarot chutz min haktana shebigdolot. Obviously, the Gemara is going to ask, why do you have to say this in both cases? So first, the Gemara says, and we saw this whole sugya already, haktano bichlal. Go back to the first case. He says, my daughter doesn't include the older ones, but it sounds like it includes all the younger ones who are all potentially betrothed. How could this be? Shmat mina sounds from here that Kiddushin she'em isurim l'bi'ah have a Kiddushin. We can get right. Remember this whole big machloket between Rava and Abaye. This would be clear from the Mishna that this is Kiddushin. He can't have bi'ah with any of them, have relations with any of them, because perhaps he's betrothed to the sisters. In which case, it sounds like this is Kiddushin because he's potentially betrothed to all of the younger ones. To which they say, they're really talking about these two daughters. One is above the age of mitzvah, obligate, and the other is not. Bagrot katani, but it says bagrot in plural. Any of the older daughters, which sounds like there's older daughters and younger daughters. My bagrot to Amma. It's talking about all older daughters of men in general that this could happen to, and not older daughters of this person. Pshita. Now, isn't it pretty obvious? If there's an older daughter and a younger daughter, obviously he needs a younger daughter because he doesn't have the power to betroth the older daughter. So, bagrot, what did the bagrot have anything to do with this? To which we answered already. We saw this whole sugya a few days ago. It's a case where she told him to be a messenger to betroth her. You might have thought that when he accepted the Kiddushin, then he was just fulfilling what the daughter sent him to do. He's going to get the money of the betrothal from the younger daughter because it goes to him. But the older daughter is going to go to her. So if he has a choice, the older daughter sent me on him as a messenger, but I'm supposed to betroth my younger daughter. And if I betroth my younger daughter, I'll get money. He's obviously going to do the thing that gives him money rather than the one that doesn't. To which they say, that can't be a good answer because Milo askina da'amre le kiddushay lecha. What if she were to tell him, you can get the money of my betrothal? Now, the Mishna didn't seem to distinguish, in that case, it would be the older one, so that can't be the issue. They say no, even so, the younger daughters are in his domain. He's supposed to betroth them. It's a mitzvah for him to betroth them, and he's not going to then betroth someone who the older one who asked him to be a messenger for her. We're going to assume if he has one or the other, he's going to choose the younger daughter because the mitzvah is upon him to betroth it. We talked about this and problematic things with this, but I'm not going to go into it now because it's late. We talked about it last time we learned it. So now why do you need the case of the Gdolah and the Ketana? They both say the exact same thing. Now here's an interesting assumption about how people speak, or did in those days. In the first case, you might have said, Rabbi Meir, that there's a doubt whether Gdolah means any one of the three. Because people often call anyone who's older than someone is called an older daughter. But in a ketana, Rabbi Yossi, you're not going to call someone young if they're older than other people. Okay, interesting to think there's a difference there, but younger maybe is a more derogatory term, so you're going to save that for really the one who's the youngest. I'm not sure if that's the issue, but maybe. And then we're going to take the same logic and say the opposite, that it's, if you said it then in the Ketana case, you might have thought Baha Ka'amar Rabbi Yossi. That's what Rabbi Yossi says by Ketana. It's clear it's only one. But for the same logic we just said a minute ago, you might have thought in the Gdolah case of Abahach, Ema Modile the Rabbi Meir, that Gdolah could mean one of the three. And then he would agree with Rabbi Meir. So that's why they need to tell you they argue in both cases. Now we go back to the reason for this. It seems like it's saying that what? Rabbi Meir thinks people say things that are ambiguous and leave things open and therefore get themselves into these sticky situations. And that's why all three are going to be potentially betrothed. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you would never do that. In which case, when you say what you said, you meant what you said. And therefore, you meant it would be one thing only, and that must be the oldest of the older. So if that's the case, though, we have a Mishna where the exact opposite is true. This is the Mishna we learned also. We learned it in Masechet Nedarim, I assume. You vow forbid something to yourself until Pesach, you're forbidden until Pesach. Ad Sheyeh Pesach, you use the language until Pesach is, what you meant is Asur Ad Shetetzeh. It's forbidden to you until the end of Pesach. But Ad Pinei Pesach, which usually means until before Pesach, is a debate. Rabbi Meir Omer Asur Ad Sheyagia. You said before Pesach. Before Pesach clearly means one thing only, which is before Pesach starts. So that's Rabbi Meir, who thinks it's clear what you said, which is the opposite of what he said by us. Rabbi Yossi Omer Ad Sheyetzeh. No, you have to wait till Pesach is over, because every day is before the end of Pesach, before the second day of Pesach. The second day is before the third and the fourth and the fifth day of Pesach. So it could be you're leaving open this possibility for something ambiguous, and you have to basically forbid this to yourself until Pesach is over out of a doubt. So they actually say the exact opposite of what they said here, to which we answer very simply, Rabbi Chanina bar Avdimi Amar Rav, Muchlefet Ashita. Switch the shitot. In this case of Nedarim, you had it wrong. Who said what? And in fact, here's a braita that supports that reading. V'hatanya zahaklau kol shezmano kavua. If you take a date, which is a clear date like Pesach, you know what date it is. Ve'amar ad pinei, and the person said until before that date. Rabbi Meir Omer ad sheyetzeh, Rabbi Yossi Omer ad sheyagia. Rabbi Meir is the one who says you have to wait till the end because it's a doubt. And Rabbi Yossi said, no, it's until the beginning because it's very clear what you must have meant. And then we fit it all in together with our sugya, and we don't really have a question anymore. We're going to end here for today and pick up later, tomorrow with the rest of the sugya here, finish it up. So just a quick review. We started with this ne'emanut, right? Do we allow a father to allow skila for his daughter, right? Her to get punished. Testimony of a father about the age of a child, would that allow punishment also, right? We saw Rav Chisda was consistent and said not for punishment, but yes for other things. Then we had the Mishna about the father claiming she's betrothed or claiming she was taken into captivity and forbidden to a kohen. And then we discussed what's the difference. We thought it was all about biyado, not biyado, in his control or not. Then we said it actually all has to do with what power the Torah gave to the father to be believed. And that's all about marriage and betrothal, but not about her forbidding her to marry a kohen. Then we got to the case about the guy who we want to know, is he believed to permit her from having to do yibum, exempt her from yibum, or actually obligate her for yibum? And we said in the end, can't obligate her, only permit her. What about this machloket, Rabbi Natan and Rebbe? That was only in that particular unique case, which Rava and Abaye each have their own explanation what made that case unique. Then we get to this last part about that we just did, so I'm not going to review too much about the number one case where he just said, my daughter. Does that include all the younger daughters? In the end, it really would only be the younger daughter, not all younger daughters, because that's Kiddushin She'em B'surim L'Biyah, and she would need a divorce. And then we had the case where he has two sets of daughters, and he says older or younger, and what does that include in this machloka Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yossi about what does someone leave their statements ambiguous, in which case we have to be strict about it and be concerned that all of them are betrothed, or according to Rabbi Yossi, he's clear about it, and therefore older means oldest, younger means youngest. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a good day and a Chodesh Tov. And a real mashmod of Chodesh Tov this month. We really need it.